Scratchers. How are you doing today? You have been doing a lot of coding, written good amount of logic, and done some interesting work. Especially, you've touched a lot about using clones and using arithmetic to work with the clones. I've observed that in some of the projects where we did that, there were a lot of questions, and this is a good base framework which we are going to be covering today for many projects and games and board games and programming applications and designing things. Something very important. And you know what? It is based on calendar. Now, this is something we know each of us really need to use on a day-to-day basis. We will be able to build a pretty good event calendaring application on Scratch. Let's get to see the first thing we need for it. That is the days in a month. Now, this is a grid which has 7 days. These are called columns and these are called rows. So as you're watching this tutorial, make sure you sit with a paper pen, you pause, you do the arithmetic, you understand what are these different positions. And once you have this working for the calendar month of 31 in columns of 7, you can do this for different values. So you can do 100, like a grid of 10 by 10. So these are the ways you can really make sure that you have understood this code. And trust me, it will go a long way for you to build many different kind of projects in any programming language. If you look into the how you will code it, you're going to just be using one sprite for this. Right on. That means you're going to be using clones. So we have this one sprite called date, and if you look at the costumes, it has 31. So we are going to build the calendar for the maximum number of days for today's challenge. So 31 days. Now let us look at the cloning code. So we're using 3 variables here. We are using date to keep tab on creating these 31 dates, and we are keeping a x position variable and a y position variable. This we are setting it to the location where we want the topmost left corner, this number 1 here. This is where we want the grid to start. Now every time before we create a clone, we have put this as the initial position, and then each clone is going to be using its logic to decide where it should be. So we are making very responsible clones. Each of them know where to place themselves. Now we are using a repeat counter of 31, creating a clone of myself, and every time increasing the date by 1. Now remember, even though this is a single sprite, the variable needs to be across all sprites. And I hope you remember why. Clones, each of the clones is considered a separate sprite, and that's the reason you can code them to do so many different things. So let us look at the logic which each of them have to apply and place them where they need to be. So we are looking at now the logic when I start as a clone. What do I do? The first thing I'm doing is I am figuring out how to be in a grid of 7. Now, I don't know if you have learned this in your math class, but it's a very important operator called mod, which basically means when you divide a number and the remainder you get, that is known as the modulo. So if you want to use columns up to 7, and basically you want that after every 7 multiplication of 7, you are able to come to a new row. What we are using here is a modulo of number 7, and the remainder is going to be between 0 to 6. Now what we're doing is, because a date starts with 1, we are subtracting it by 1 so that we start with the 0th position and we go from 0 to 6. Now in this mod 7, whenever it reaches 7, that means when the modulo is 0, what is that special case we want to do? We want, that particular clone has to know that it has to come and stand in the first position, the first line. So the x is set back to the start x position. And what happens to the y? Y position has to come down by 1 row. So we are subtracting by minus 50. So these are the two special things a clone has to do when it is crossing over 7 numbers. For rest of the clones, each of the clones, what they have to do, they have to change x by this factor. Now, how is this factor calculated? The distance between each of this is a 50. So we are telling it that you move by 50 by one position here, second, if you're the second one here, if you're the third one. Now we are going to look at what each of this has to do to position itself correctly. Now each of them is placed at a distance of 50. Now to move it by 50 from here, this is one time movement of 50. This is two time movements of 50. This is three time. This is four time. This is 5 time. This is 6 time. So basically what you're doing is you're taking this number, subtracting by 1. So we are taking column number, subtracting by 1, and we are multiplying that with 50 so that it understands its position with respect to the starting position. Eventually once we have calculated it, we are changing x by move by. We are showing the right costume by switching costume, and we are changing y by the y position. With this, we have the code ready. So go ahead and make sure you do this arithmetic, this row and column creation, this understanding using paper and pen. I know some of you don't like to use paper and pen, but trust me, a lot of computing logic can become really easy for you to follow if you follow that simple practice. I look forward to hearing from you in which games have you seen this. Happy coding! Ta-da!